own both your experience and your gaps with confidence. There's no apologizing for not having a skill, no over explaining to try to cover up a gap. You just you know what you don't, but you're confident you can figure out the pieces along the way. Have you ever been preparing for an interview and then you looked at the job posting to, get your stuff together and you realize, oh, shoot, I haven't actually had experience with this particular requirement or this particular desirable. Now, this is the exact moment that you need to pause because your mind is going to go in one of two directions. If we don't pay attention to this moment, I promise you it'll go in the direction that's not beneficial for you. So here's the two directions that you could go. In this moment, you can either think, I'm not qualified. And all of a sudden, that thought, that belief is going to take over your entire preparation and interview process. Or you can go down the road that says, I've done work that I'm not really experienced in before. I've been trusted by my employer. I did pretty good, and I really enjoyed learning something new and tackling a challenge I hadn't tackled before. That's a completely different road that we're going to go on today because you don't need to meet every single requirement and desirable in order to land the role. In fact, if you do meet and you have experience with everything on their list, now you're a high risk hire because you're probably going to go for a job that offers you growth after 90 days of being on the job. So that is overqualified. That means you're likely too expensive for what they're looking to pay for that particular position. And so, what do you do instead? If you're missing something in the job description, that is perfectly fine. You're really aiming to have about 70 to 80%. And your job is to connect the dots between who you are and what you have to offer and what they need. And so, this episode is all about how to respond really powerfully in interviews when your experience does not line up perfectly and why that could actually be a strength and not your setback. I'm walking you through how to respond with confidence instead of responding from a place of panic when an interview question happens to be somewhat of a curveball because you realize you don't have experience. So, whether this is something that you realize as you're preparing for an interview where you look at the job description and it's missing something, or you're missing something that's on the job description, or if you head into the interview, you feel totally prepared, and all of a sudden you're asked a question about something that maybe wasn't even on the job posting, and you realize, I don't have a story to share about that. I don't technically have experience in that area. Whether it's a technical tool, maybe you've never used, or maybe it's a leadership responsibility that you've never held or you haven't been charged with, or maybe it's an experience that you technically haven't officially had all in one place. There is a specific way that we can handle these comments that can communicate confidence and ability as opposed to doubt and insecurity that, tends to rise up in us when we are being, in a sense, evaluated during interviews, right? And it might be a really intimidating situation. I have been there. But the reality is that we are going to talk today not about how to pretend like we know the answer or about how to spin a story to make it sound like we have experience. It's more about pivoting from a focus on finite knowledge that you can gather in a week's time, 2 weeks' time. You're shifting from that of I have the knowledge, I don't have the knowledge, over to a focus on potential, and that's the potential of your intellect. So, for example, you probably don't know everything that's inside of a textbook, but you know how to use the table of contents, you know how to find your way around, and given exact same information, one person can do a whole lot more with it than the second person. So that is our intellectual ability. And so if we can think a little bit more broader about intellectual ability and intellectual potential, meaning what can I do with the information that I have? And how can I bridge the gap between that and any information that I don't have? That's much different than I need to have all the information and all the answers right now, or else I'm not good enough for this position. So if you can shift from do I have the knowledge, do I not, to do I have the potential to gather the knowledge and do with the knowledge what needs to be done in order to solve the problem. Now, I don't even know how many years at this point, over 10 or 15, I have coached and counseled so many people who have said things like, well, I didn't apply because they wanted X experience. Or maybe I blanked out because they asked me about something that I didn't have experience in when I was in the interview, and that wasn't even in the job posting. There's always a pattern when this happens. And the pattern is that the issue is never really not having experience. It's really the mindset with which we talk about that lack of experience. So, for example, most of these cases, we start with, no, I don't really have that experience. And immediately you see sort of like the life, the confidence just flow out of a person. But instead, you want to craft a story, reframe how you share it, share a strategy, with the point being that it not only answers the question, but it strengthens your positioning without having to feel like you're making up a situation in which you have experience. Okay, so here we go. Let's imagine that you're in the interview. It's going so, so good. All of a sudden, they ask you, have you ever managed an enterprise wide transformation with global stakeholders? And your heart kind of skips because you realize you haven't done that yet. And you haven't been in that title, and your scope hasn't involved that. And all of a sudden, all you can think of is what you don't have. That right there is your pivot moment. This is when you decide that you are not going to panic. You're going to take a breather, and we're going to unpack 5 different ways that you can both mentally and in terms of mindset and also practically answer this question in a way that puts you ahead of the pack. All right, first things first, you've got to stop the perfectionism, my friend. Like, I am a person who is such a perfectionist, right? But that actually means that we're just delaying the outcome for worry, or dare I say it, for fear that we're not going to get it right. That's where perfectionism really comes from. And so we want to drop that perfectionism and instead pick up curiosity, because that curiosity is what helped you to have a great time tackling a brand new challenge just a couple years ago, when a boss kind of put their trust and their confidence in you and they said, hey, I need you to take on this challenge. I know you've never done it, but we're going to promote you and you just got to figure it out, right? That is the only difference between the prior situation that you enjoyed and that you really knocked out of the park and this current situation. That is the only difference. That in one situation, somebody said, hey, I trust you. I think you can do this. And another situation, they're asking, can you do this? And you can be the person who reminds yourself, hey, I trust you. I know you can do this. Let's go ahead and move forward with this challenge from a place of curiosity. And so let's go back here. They're going to ask you that question of, have you ever managed an enterprise wide transformation with global stakeholders? What you can say is, that's a great question. Can you share what success in that area looks like for your organization? Or you can go even more broadly and you can say, can you tell me a little bit more about what that looks like at your organization? You don't even have to say success. You can just say, can you tell me a little bit more about what that looks like at your organization? What happens when you ask this question? Number one, it buys you time to think and it starts to shift your own mindset. And so sometimes our behavior comes from our mindset and our beliefs and what's the thoughts in our head. But sometimes we can actually say things and behave in ways and do things, right? Take actions with our body that can send a message to our brain. Similar to, I don't know if you've heard of this, but when you are about to go into an interview, right? This is a great time to do this. You can actually give yourself a little bit of confidence by using up more space. So, you know how you do a jumping jack and you have like your hands are spread out and your feet are spread out? What you're doing is you're taking up more space. So, almost inevitably, there's a little bit of a spike in how confident you feel in that moment. So, being able to do something with your body, like taking up more space, can bring that confidence and a little bit more of that belief into your mind. And so, when you ask that question, can you share what that looks like in your organization? It's a curious question. So not only does it buy you time to think, but it also starts to put your mind in a more curious space, helping to move out a little bit of that perfectionism. Okay, so that response helps you to buy more time and start shifting your own mindset, but it also clarifies the real question they have. Is this about logistics? Are they asking about influence? Are they curious about leadership? And so not only are you kind of internally buying yourself time, giving yourself a bit of a mindset reframe, but you're also gathering more information. Remember when, well, you don't have to remember, it's like you probably were, at a conference event not that long ago, maybe even as early as, last week, as recently as last week. And so think about the last time that you met somebody. You're going to shake hands and it's going to be a bunch of small talk because you don't yet have a connection. You don't know where your story and their story overlap, right? So you might say something like, "How's the weather? How about them Dodgers? How was that football game this weekend?" Right? Stuff that is really broad and things that you don't even know if they're into sports. You don't even know where they live and therefore how the weather is, right? So you're going to ask these questions, but eventually you're going to ask more and more questions, and they're going to share something, and you're going to say something like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know you lived in Dallas too. I didn't know you lived in Florida. I love Florida. I went to vacation there, such and such, whatever," right? The point is that you're then going to find this overlap, this common ground. It's the same thing here in interviews. So when you're asking questions, tell me a little bit more about that. You're learning more about their situation, and most of the time, something is going to click where they're going to explain it. And even though the original question sounded like you had no experience with enterprise wide transformation with global stakeholders, right? Maybe they start talking about logistics. And you're like, "Oh, yeah, I have done everything you can think of around logistics. It just hasn't been global yet. So let me tell you about my logistics experience and how we, change the entire organization. There's enterprise wide, right? Through some changes in logistics." So, again, asking that question changes your mindset to a place of curiosity, clarifies what they need, and bonus, it also shows emotional intelligence and strategic thinking. Emotional intelligence comes across because so many folks think they have an answer immediately. And to be honest, that's really all of us. I would say self included. As soon as you ask a question, I'm like, "Ooh, I know, I know," right? We think we know the answer. But the reality is that we typically need more time to look at the problem, to understand the problem, to gather input and information about the problem. And that is going to lead to a much better solution. So, you asking that question immediately tells them you're not one to just jump up and say, "I have the answer." You're not going to come in and change things right away. You want to learn before you take action. All right. Okay, so for example, if they're asking about international experience, you're probably going to learn as they're sharing more information that what they really want is someone who can work across time zones or who can navigate that cultural nuance if it's not something like logistics, right? But maybe you have experience with those time zones and that cultural nuance that they're talking about. And so even though your title didn't have global in it, you still can speak from experience in a relevant or an adjacent area. Okay, so we've asked the question, one little question that in theory changes everything. Now I'm going to share with you a couple different things you can do really practically to answer this question. The first thing is to break it down into its most basic terms. So, for example, every single complex task, really, really complicated project management is built from foundational skills. So, project management is really, can you get things done on time and can you get things done in budget? You have a calendar, you have a budget, you have a bunch of people and a bunch of tasks, and you've got to make it all work. So every complex task is built from basic foundational skills. So let's say they ask about that global stakeholder engagement. You haven't done that. That's okay because you break it down in your mind. What does that include? That includes maybe leading cross departmental initiatives. It includes navigating, all these competing priorities because everyone in their country or their state, their department wants, their own priorities. And it also involves building consensus when there's a lot of resources involved. It's a high stake environment, right? And so what you can do is ask yourself, what is the underlying skill? Who would be really successful? Someone who's really influential, someone who knows how to align the tasks with the business goals, or maybe communication and interpretation of, interactions is really important. So think about those basics. The next thing is to then leverage your transferable wins. So you might say something like, well, I haven't done this in global environments in that exact same context. And I want you to emphasize exact same context. I'll tell you why in a second. But you'd say, I haven't done global transformations or I haven't done global stakeholder engagement in that exact same context, but I have. Managed cross functional departments across the United States, and that required very similar skills. Okay, so two things there. First, that exact same context. By saying a phrase like that, what you're saying is, well, that's incredibly specific and it's not necessary to be that specific. And then when you say, but I have done Y, which required similar skills. What you're doing there is you're bridging the dots. You're making the parallel between the skills you have and the skills they need really, really obvious because they may not connect the dots. Okay, so for example, I haven't used Asana specifically to manage product lines, but I've led multi team scheduling and resource for a company wide launch using a very similar system called Trello. And I didn't know that system when I first started either. Now, Trello and Asana might be technically different tools, but the coordination, the deadlines, the leadership, all of those things are the same. And I'm sure I can learn Asana in a matter of weeks. Okay, so what you're doing is you're making the parallel between the skills that you have and the skills they need really, really obvious. And then you're de emphasizing the need for this exact specific experience. All right, so first, it's asking the question that kind of flips the mind frame that you have in your mind and that also garners information and positions you as someone who's strategic and emotionally intelligent. Then you're going to break down the complex task that they need into foundational skills and then leverage your transferable wins. So you're going to share what you have done, the outcomes you have garnered, and then de emphasize their niche experience and emphasize your specific skills. And then what you can do as part of that story is that you can share a figure it out story, meaning you can share how you have overcome. So, for example, just a minute or two ago, I mentioned, I already did this, but I just happen to have done it with Trello, which is a little bit different. But I've already managed to figure that out because I didn't know that at the beginning, right? You're going to do that exact same thing. And that's because confidence doesn't come from the fact that you've done everything in the world. It comes from trusting your ability to learn, right? We talked about the potential of your intellect over the yes or no of having finite knowledge that you can learn in just a matter of a couple of weeks. So, for example, being able to share, figure it out story might say something like, well, one time I was asked to lead an employee training rollout across multiple different regions, and that's something that I hadn't done before. But I ended up reaching out to several managers. I built this really scalable and streamlined system, and I got buy in from leadership in order to take care of all that scaling. And along that route, we went ahead and cut onboarding time by 30% in 2 months and saved 15% of our budget. So I can figure these things out, and I know that I can bring similar results for you as well. So, what these stories are sharing are that you're not going to wait for someone to tell you what to do or for someone to show you how to do something. You're going to figure out what your gap is. You're going to fill your gap by being resourceful and using the potential of your intellect. You're going to learn the skills you're missing, and then you're going to deliver just like you've done before, time and time again. Now, at the end of the day, just remember this last point, and that is to own both your experience and your gaps with confidence. Now, I know that sounds crazy. How do I own my gaps with confidence? Am I supposed to be like, no, I don't have that skill. Thank you very much. No, what I mean is that you are going to, it's kind of acknowledging, hey, I'm human. There's no way I'm going to have everything. But the combination of skill sets that I have will give me the ability to bridge any gap that you have. Like if they want something and you don't have it, but you have everything else, you want to show them that you are confident in your ability to fill that gap. And if you're trying to cover that gap and be like, well, I think I could, you know what I mean? Like there's words and behaviors that are going to come out in how you're explaining it that will tell them if you're confident in your ability to fill that gap. And if you're not confident, you can say the words, but they're going to get the message that you're not confident, even though your words are, I know that I can figure that out. If your body language and how you say it, your inflection, your tone, the rest of the interview doesn't communicate that same confidence, then it's not going to make a good impression. And so ultimately, the energy behind your words matters more than the words themselves. So your goal is to come into that interview with a leadership presence, with this executive presence, right? We all talk about that. So that's essentially saying you're confident in who you are. There's things you know, there's things you don't know, and you remain confident. There's no apologizing for not having a skill. There's no over explaining to try to cover up a gap. You just know what you know what you don't, but you're confident you can figure out the pieces along the way. Now, listen, if this episode resonated with you, if this episode is helpful for your next interview and you feel like I could use a little bit more interview guidance, then head over to episode 106, which is the confidence killer. We really talk about why smart people freeze in interviews. And it happens more to people who are high achievers. So if that's you, head over to episode 106, and then you can skip into episode 110 to structure and draft your tell me about yourself response. Now, on our next solo episode, which is episode 116 coming out on June 17th, I'm going to share the exact steps that I would take if I had a high stakes interview and only 30 minutes to prep. So don't forget, June 17th, episode 116. I'll meet you there. Now, listen, this whole piece is really about pivoting from that focus on finite knowledge, have and have not, to a focus on the potential of what you could do with your intellect over the long term. And remember that you might choose your words, but it's your mindset that's going to choose your message. It's going to choose your behavior, all the nonverbals, the inflection, all those things. So you might choose your words, but it's your mindset that's going to choose your message. So the next time you hear a question that you're not sure how to answer, remember to pause, breathe, choose which direction you're going to go, a direction of lack and worry, or a direction of confidence in your potential. Reframe the next words that come out of your mouth into that curiosity and that question, and decide how you want to approach this. All right, remember that you've done hard things before and you can handle this too. For now, though, know that I'm cheering you on, praying for you. We'll see you on the next one. Hey, thanks for listening. I really appreciate you spending time with me today. If you found this episode helpful, please tap the 5-star review on the show's homepage in your podcast app. It would absolutely make my day, and it helps others discover the Uncommon Career Podcast. Now, to download your free career resources and learn how I help seasoned professionals land amazing offers in as little as 90 days, click on the link in the description or go to theuncommoncareer.com. Thanks again, and I'll see you on the next one.